and we'll get started. All right, welcome back. We are doing the Minutemen Training, I guess we'll call it Minutemen Training Podcast for the time being. My name is Luke Burkholder. I'm the primary instructor, I guess CEO of Minutemen Training. And here we have Tyler. He is one of our assistant instructors. He's also a master class in IDPA. So something Tyler mentioned this last weekend of May was a good bit of history that comes from firearms training and competition that is kind of only really known by word of mouth, and it's really there's not too much knowledge on the suspect or on the subject that most people who don't do it know about it. So I'll let Tyler kind of break it down and kind of go into a kind of the history that kind of brought us to modern pistol training and shooting.
Yeah. So it all started Jeff Cooper, who I'm sure a lot of people will know. If you don't know who he is, he's very easy to look up. Jeff Cooper, who is a writer and editor for a couple different firearm magazines way back in the day, started to develop what he called the modern technique through Leather Slap and the Southwest Pistol League in Southern California back in the very early 70s. And as he's developing the modern technique, he taught a class on that, which later evolved into Gunsight, his company's 250 course, the basic pistol course. A couple years had gone by. He's doing the Southwest Pistol League. Pistol competitions at the time were either bullseye intensive, what was at the time called combat shooting, more equivalent to USPSA or IDPA today is what it would look like, which was abnormal. So eventually enough people pester him about wanting the next step in his pistol class that he gets with a couple of former students and friends who live in Columbia, Missouri. They gather delegates from all over the world, 14 countries. If I remember right, every continent was represented except for Antarctica for obvious reasons. And they tell everybody, hey, come to Columbia, Missouri. These are our dates in late May of 1976. And we're going to sit down and we're going to build a shooting league. And their tagline to get people to come is Cooper is going to teach his next level handgun course in the afternoons. That was their tagline. And that's what brought a lot of the people there. So at the time, there wasn't what we have today with a robust firearms training industry. That wasn't a thing. So Cooper came out, people from all over the United States and the world came out, total of 45 delegates. They elected Cooper as the first interim president until the first world shoot occurred, which, if memory serves, was about 10 years into what became IPSC's lifetime. They would break out to working groups in the morning and early afternoon to work on rules around holsters and then developing power factor and hit factor for pistols and the kind of general underlying rule set for IPSC. And then in the afternoon, they would go shoot Cooper's advanced level pistol course with ammunition that he provided. At the end of that week, when they left, there were some awards presented. If I remember right, I think it was Ken Hackathorn got a Colt AR-15. Like, there were some pretty good prizes on the table for top shot in the class. But when they walked away, that what they had was the founding document for the International Pistol Shooting Confederation. For those that don't know, that's the parent organization of today's USPSA if you're in the United States. Later that year, IPSC began to roll. Cooper moves to Arizona and he starts Gunsight. Gunsight started in October of 1976, and the rest is kind of history from there. One of the things that made Cooper interesting and unique, and I think kind of set him apart even from us guys doing this stuff today, Cooper was a very meticulous documentarian of the who, the what, and the why. So that's why he got big and popular. A lot of people knew him, and luckily, thankful for his records of the Columbia Conference, there is a memorial website for him where you can actually look at the meeting notes broken down day by day for how that conference rolled out, what the working groups were, what they talked about, the kind of things they came in, and then Cooper's initial kind of rough sketches for what he wanted the IPSC targets to look like. And that's another kind of interesting rabbit hole, is the targets that a lot of people associate with IPSC or USPSA today were not the original target, not even close. Cooper had originally, it was scoring rings, a little more similar to an IDPA target. That type of target that Cooper wanted originally was changed slightly and then became what was called the Millbrook in early IPSC. But through the mid 80s, there were 3 or 4 different target types you would see. One was the Millbrook, one was the Florida 8, which looked almost exactly like today's IDPA target. And the other one was the item target, which is pretty close to today's USPSA target. So there's a lot of interesting rabbit holes there. And it's unfortunate that those pieces of our history as gun people are not more widely known. Is that the Columbia Conference not only generated today's competitive shooting scene, it generated our industry as firearms trainers kind of as a whole, kicked everything off. Everything started in Columbia, Missouri in late May 1976. So it's very interesting. I'll shoot you the link to post to this. So if guys want to read through that, the day by day breakdown of what happened, it's an interesting read.
Yeah. Is that on a Gunsight's website or?
It's not Gunsight. If I remember right, I think it's the Jeff Cooper Memorial Foundation.
Okay.
Or
Yeah, I know what you're talking about because they have a fundraiser where you can apply to get a Gunsight 250 class too if you have to apply for that grant or fundraiser. But I've seen that website. Yeah. Yeah. No, that's a because like I said, that's a good bit of info that people don't think of, and there were competitions before that. Like you said, it was bowling pins. It was regional. They weren't widespread. It was guys going down to the like junkyards essentially and just plinking and doing some random competition with no sets of rules, or like the police pistol league. I've heard Masada, you talk about that, and he mentioned how it was like the I think late 60s, early 70s, where one of the guys who was a good shooter at the time was trying to make a custom revolver and holster, and
yeah,
at the time he ended up shooting him, not Masada you, but the guy who was a big name shooter at the time. I don't remember the name, so I don't want to just throw names out there,
yeah,
but he ended up shooting himself because he was trying to draw his gun. And back then, it was very common not to have a trigger guard holster or something that covered up the trigger guard. So he ended up shooting himself in the leg at this national police pistol competition. And then they didn't DQ people back then for that. He just kind of manned up, reset, and then shot the whole stage. And then afterwards, he said some choice words and bandaged himself up, and then kept going for the day. So,
yeah.
like it was just random stuff back then. For
Well,
actual practical shooting, it was Jeff Cooper in that Columbia conference that really made it a universal competition that can be enjoyed nationwide and country or and worldwide. And it really drove, like you said earlier, it really drove the training industry as a whole because we're not just trying to have cops out there doing bullseye training or military out there doing bullseye training. I've talked to guys in special operations and they're like, no, we'd set up stages like USPSA, and that was our range day. So we wouldn't have that if it wasn't for essentially that conference and Jeff Cooper.
well, and I know it's for people interested in history. There are, especially within the kind of gun and training space, there are kind of spheres, right? Where, like one of them is Pat Rogers. Pat Rogers, God rest his soul, passed away a little over 10 years ago this year. I think he died 2 or 3 months ago was the 10th anniversary. But Uncle Pat was one of those guys that everybody knew. Everybody knew who he was. And there were choice and selected almost apprentice instructors that he had who then continued to take the gospel that Pat Rogers wrote and pass it around. Another one's Tom Givens,
Yeah.
Ken Hackathorn, right? Like big guys like that. But when you go and put a pin in every one of those guys, even the guys that are just really starting to take off today, like Ben Stager, when you put a pin in every one of those guys and trace that thread back as far as it goes, it all starts at Jeff Cooper in the Columbia Conference. Every bit of it. Whether they got big in USPSA, whether they got big in IDPA, which split off. It was a split group from USPSA. Whether they started in IPSC or they went to Gunsight, they were Coopers, that kind of select group of students that he fostered to carry on the work that he started. It all goes back to Cooper and Columbia. All of it does. Every bit of it. And if you're an astute student of history and really dig into the material there, the biggest thing I will tell you is work to pass that on. Write it down, remember it as best you can. Tell everybody who will listen, because and I think it's because we're an industry of manly men. We don't like to talk about ourselves. We don't like to take pictures. We don't like to write things down. I think we're hitting now a length away from Cooper and the foundation being laid that a lot of people are really beginning to lose that sense of history and tradition that comes from that.
Yeah.
So that's my biggest thing is if you're interested in it, dig into it, read the notes, see how every day went, because especially when you look back, you'll start finding if you're at the beginning of your kind of shooting and training journey, you go take a low light class and you hear about this weird flashlight technique called Harris or Harry's. Mike Harris was a dude. Mike Harris was a dude at the Columbia Conference who came up with that method. So, like, you see all of these strings fanning out from it that just go everywhere. And it goes down to the level of more local guys like you and I. And it doesn't just stop there where, the foundations of what we teach, why we teach it, how we teach it, all still kind of go back to that Columbia Conference. So it's been an interesting because I noticed it was the 50th anniversary and I thought it was coming up. I thought maybe it was next year. So I did some digging and that's when I found those notes. I'm like, oh shit, it's this year. It's this week. And started kind of reaching out to other people I know going, hey, what do you know about this that isn't in the notes?
Yeah.
So like one thing I didn't find in the original rule set for IPSC, which would be unthinkable today, cross draw and shoulder holsters were not just allowed, they were allowed by name. Like it was agreed that those are practical ways to carry a gun. They should be allowed for our practical shooting competition.
And yeah, nowadays that's a strongly opposed.
No go.
Yeah, it's interesting the progression. So
And even little safety things today. One of the things that they did promote, and I did find it in the original meeting notes, they promoted hot holstering the gun for movement.
yeah, I know because I heard Tom Givens talking about this. I know when they first started making IPSC IPSC, the idea was to have a hot range.
Yeah.
The main reason that IDPA, USPSA, and IPSC are all cold ranges for the most part is not due to the rules because they wanted that back then. It was the range, and in order for them to find a range that would allow them to do this new state-of-the-art sport, they had to somewhat give a compromise and say, all right, we won't do hot range, we'll do a cold range. That way we have people walk around with unloaded guns, no mags, and to meet their safety rules. And that was not that just ended up sticking because that's what everyone else did. But it was if they had it their way, they would have kept it a hot range. So
Yeah, and there's a lot of real weird if you really start digging in. The other thing I would encourage people to do is if you hear something in your training journey, like for me, it was pinning the trigger, right? Because Luke, I know you and I think you
yep,
went to the same law enforcement academy I did.
yep.
Those instructors told you to pin the trigger to the rear through recoil.
So we have a unloaded gun here. I just checked it. I know this is going to be a podcast, so some people can see it. Some will. If you're on YouTube, you can see it. But basically, what he's saying is you've pressed a shot. After the gun's fired, you keep your finger pinned to the rear. The gun cycles, and then I'll let you pick up where you're going.
You, you'll slowly let out the trigger until you feel and hear reset.
Right there.
Press the trigger again.
All right. And
So,
that, yeah, go on.
so that came from the original time, and I learned this from Brian Eastridge, who is a PPC master, this police pistol competitions that you were
Yep.
talking about earlier. He was very heavily involved in those when he was a younger man. And the idea of pinning the trigger to the rear came from, or the first recorded instance of it is with the original 1911 pistols that were common in PCC, because guys were gamifying it and they were screwing with the internal parts. If
Mm.
you loaded a gun and racked around without pressure on the disconnector, the gun would fire. That's the
Oh,
instance of pinning the trigger to the rear. And then in the 80s, we saw it pop back up when police departments were going from K&L frame revolvers to DASA guns.
yeah,
And now we've got to teach people to manage two triggers on one gun.
yeah,
Uh, like little things like that pop up, and it's interesting to know where they come from. And it's important where we know where they
yeah,
come from, because God forbid, but in 20, 30, 50 years, certain people have their way with the law, and we are back to pump action shotguns, lever guns, and K&L frame revolvers.
yeah. Instead of even inventing the wheel, yeah,
You've got to know how to run those guns. So talk to the old guys, figure it out. Every like regional or national level instructor I've ever spoken to, you cold DM them on social media with a legitimate question of, you were there, I want to know about it. They'll call you, they'll
yeah,
text you, they'll email you something, and you will get every bit of information you want to know. So it's important that we continue to do that as we move into the future, because 300 years from now, this thing's still going to be somewhere on the internet.
yeah,
But
yeah,
guys 50 years ago didn't have that.
yeah. That's one thing I like about taking these classes from the older instructors. Whether it's Masada, you, Tom Gibbons, Kent Hackathorn, even though he's retired now, but instructors like that are reading their books. You can, because I know guys who will say, "I'm not going to take a class home. I can shoot better than them." I'm like, sure, that's not saying much to be able to shoot better than a 90-year-old man. But,
Right?
it's like, I expect you, if you've been doing this sport for any period of time, that you're going to be able to to shoot better than a guy who's 90 years old who
Yeah.
probably is 40 years past the end of his prime. Like, that's understandable. But the knowledge that comes with that, it's like I've taken classes from Masada Yu and Tom Gibbons, and just listening to the how we got from where we are to now is honestly some of the best parts of those classes. Because now you take a modern class, there's hardly any ever classroom time. There's hardly any history behind it. It's more just shooting, which, don't get me wrong, like it's good to know how to shoot, but we also aren't learning the history behind it, which it's listen to it from the people who lived it while you can. We did the same thing with World War I vets and World War II vets. We by the time people started realizing that they had stories to tell, they're in their 80s and 90s, and we were trying to hear it while we could. They can't fight anymore at that point. Sure, you if you applied that same logic of why would I listen to this guy that I could beat in a fight? It's like that makes no sense. We're learning what we're learning what they learned the hard way, what they experienced, what the history behind that. We're trying to learn that so it can continue living through the future, so we can pass that down to other generations and tell those stories that we got told.
Yeah.
Why not listen to it from the guys who actually lived it instead of trying to let it get lost. So that's the biggest thing I take away from taking classes from those older instructors, because I took Tom's master instructor course, and that went into firearms training from like 1910 until about the 1970s. And if you take his professional one, I believe it goes from, I might be mixing the slots up, but I believe that goes from the 70s to now.
Yeah.
And it goes into holster design and holster use throughout all that time. So people think appendix carry's new. It's not. It just disappeared for like 40 years until people
Yeah.
found it, and they're like, "Oh, we got this brand new thing." It's like that was actually around in 1910, 1920, and 1930, and it wasn't until the 40s, 50s, and 60s where we started getting away from it until we started bringing it back in the early 2000s. So,
Well, and it, like, especially appendix here, if you really dig it, it goes back way further.
yeah,
It's like, I don't think a lot of people say it anymore. There was a thing when you and I were coming up in the gun space called Mexican carry,
yeah, yeah,
carry without a holster, right?
yeah,
And that comes from the old vaqueros weren't allowed to carry in Western towns. You tie a string around your waist on a slip knot, tie it to the trigger guard. When you walk into town, you slip the gun low in your pants, it hides the gun. But in order to do that, you got to have the gun up front. So I think it was Clint Smith. And when I went down that rabbit hole, he has, I think it's an original, like late 1880s, early 1890s holster
yeah,
that's designed to button into the pants, button into the suspenders, and it's leather to stick a single action arm in.
yeah,
It's old. All of this stuff is old. It's out there. We've learned the lessons. So, dig in what you can, learn as much as you can, and figure out the why. And it saves yourself so much time and money and effort and headache and just effort that you don't have to put out, because we've learned this lesson 100 times over.
yeah. Like thigh straps.
Yep.
People think those are new, or they think that they started in the 80s. Look at the Civil War. They would have a flap holster, a leather holster, it'd like have a flap that would go over the butt of the pistol, and then they'd have a leather strap that'd go around their legs, so that way that it wasn't bouncing around.
And even like on that front, we're talking about the old, like the real old stuff,
Yeah,
talking about the history of firearms training, especially through the early 1900s, through, I would say really it didn't die off until the 70s, maybe even later. The idea of pistols are handguns, you shoot them with one hand.
yeah,
And a lot of people don't realize you run that rabbit hole, and that goes back to the US cavalry shooting single action armies on horseback, because one for the gun, one for the horse. We have to control the horse, and we're fighting on this thing. And this is a big animal that probably does not like explosions going off next to its
right.
head. And it's just little things like that. Or like you can't see your sights in a gunfight,
Yeah,
right? You watching this might not be able to see your sights in a gunfight because you don't practice that way. But
it's like reading through Jim Cirillo's book, which is something we mentioned. We'll go and break down a little more later. That man was in 20 to 30 gunfights in a 5 year period. Listen, like reading to that, he was like, no, he saw his sights. The first time he was in a gunfight, he mentioned how he saw his sights, and was it, I don't remember if he had a revolver or semi-auto at that time, but
if I remember right, it was a Smith and Wesson Model 10, I believe, because I think that was the robbery where the guy was running behind the cash register and he shot him
yeah,
from the run.
yeah, and it's guys who do that, guys who get into a lot of gunfights. It's People think the Wild West was when there was a ton of gunfights. It was the 1910s and 1920s and during Prohibition. Jim Cirillo was, like you mentioned earlier, that era was a pretty bad time in New York City. It was the most violent city at the time in the U.S.
Yep.
Those guys were getting into a lot of gunfights. So it was not uncommon to see, breaking it down to 1910s, 20s, and then Jonesville's time in the 60s, 70s. It was not uncommon to see have some of those guys in specialized units be in 20, 30, even 40 gunfights. The Texas Rangers that hunted down Bonnie and Clyde, they got brought
Mhm.
back. They got brought out of retirement to go hunt down Bonnie and Clyde.
Yeah. Frank
They're
Hamer and God, I forget the other guy's
Yeah,
name.
Frank. I believe it was Frank. He was in over 50 gunfights before he came out
Hmm.
of retirement.
Yep.
Do you do that? You're like it's people who don't train or are not controlling, their adrenaline's pumping. They're not used to doing that. These guys got used to it. They use their sights. It was not a just a tool there. You have to make aimed hits. You have to hit what you're trying to shoot. You can't miss fast enough to win a gunfight. You got to use those sights. So
Yeah. And then, well, that's the big thing. The biggest for guys who might be interested in like the history side of it, who are really digging in, getting in the rabbit holes, chasing stuff down. The best piece of advice I give you is go back. Really, the most accessible one is probably some of the older primary and secondary episodes with the guys from American Fighting Revolver, Daryl Bulkey, Brian Eastridge. Some of the stuff with Chuck Haggard is pretty good. If you can get some of the ones with Steve Fisher or Chuck Pressburg, you'll get a little bit more of the Pat Rogers side of it and like how we developed fighting with rifles, how that
yeah,
works, especially for like professional end users. Guys think Hydra mounts are the cool thing right now.
right.
We've had 3-inch optic over bores before.
Yeah,
In the carry handle days, we went away from it for a reason. So
yeah,
just little things like that of, man, dig in, do the research, learn what you can, and help to spread that out of, hey, dude, like let me save you, a couple $100 a heartbreak here, and let me tell you the secret sauce before you even get started, because we've learned that lesson, we've learned it the hard way. Let's take this into the future, keeping those lessons in mind.
yeah. That is, it's something like you mentioned earlier. We're gonna have to keep passing them along, passing that history along, because so many people would just be fine if it disappeared. And it's sad when you have either history or art. It's like I said, it's our history, history of gun guys, history of competition shooters. Like so many people have no idea where USPSA came from. So many people have no idea that USPSA is the US version of IPSC. They don't know about IPSC, or they don't know, like they don't realize that IDPA was USPSA and they split off because they had some small fundamental differences, and they thought they wanted a different sport. So it's not a they don't know why this or that happened. They just got into it, and it's been here. It's always been here. It'll always be here, and it's not the case. So
I'll leave it because I know we're getting close to the end here. I'll leave it our viewers with a little tidbit to kind of get them started down the trail. If you think a failure to stop drill and a Mozambique drill are the same thing, they're not. They are markedly different for one big reason. I won't say it here, but do your digging, do your research, figure out what the difference is and why they're different. And it's those little things that you have to take into your own training, your own progression forward, and roll it into the goals and the pathways that you're trying to go down and walk. Because if not, you've got to learn that whole lesson all over again. It just makes it way harder.
yeah. Well, I think that'll be the end of this episode. The next episode, we're going to be talking about a fundraiser that Tyler's been working with to help bring training to local law enforcement in smaller towns that do not have the financial or means to get big city training, basically. So that'll be our next episode. We'll see you later on the Minutemen podcast.